Talking about some practical advice for our aspiring leaders. Now, many of our listeners and many of your followers on the social media or on the podcast or other mediums, they're all aspiring leaders. What practical advice would you have for them for their advancement in their careers? And this is a good time for them to start developing those leadership skills. So, what would you say to them?
Um, don't always emulate your leader, okay? Because not everybody in a leadership role is really a leader, in my view, right? I define leadership like sort of the textbook way, plus the textbook way being it's about focus, it's about influence, it's about vision, as differentiated from a manager for whom it's operational efficiency, productivity, honoring systems and processes. Simplistically, those are sort of and then there's a lot of overlap, actually. But I want to add things like empathy and integrity. You have got to tell the truth. And I've been in places where the truth has not been honored. Yes. And you're treated like, well, you don't deserve to know the truth. And so just kind of stay over here. But what does that do? That creates a lack of trust. And if I don't trust you, I'm not going to respect you. And if you're not respected as a leader, you will not be effective. It's just that simple. So that's why I'm saying a lot of the things that I think are leadership competencies and attributes, which are more the personal elements of who you are, like the empathy, that's not less a competency and more an attribute. I want people to I want you to be really good at what you do. That's great. Understand your functional area of expertise, but understand that isn't enough. The leadership competencies around decision-making, strategic thinking, navigating ambiguity, building inclusive teams. Those are specific competencies, and you can break down the behaviors of how you get those things accomplished. And you have to be deliberate in choosing to do that. It would help if you're also incentivized by your senior leaders to behave in that way, right? So a lot of people that are coming from their own personal standards. That's what I did, right? I wasn't being told to do certain things, but when I managed my teams at Google, that's where I was coming from, in spite of whatever else might have been going on around me, right?
Sure.
So that's what I want to urge people to do. It's, yes, your functional expertise is valuable. Put yourself in situations where you get exposed to learning how to navigate some of these other dynamics and make decisions and have data, these leadership competencies. I have a list of sample competencies on my website. It's part of the career mapping workbook. And it's a sample. I mean, there are hundreds. There's no one singular list. There are hundreds of them. And your organization probably has leadership competencies that that they can pull from as well.
Yeah, and as you evolve as an organization and the employees, I think this list will continue evolving, right?
That's right.
So one of my old organizations, I remember, since you talked about incentivizing behavior, they used to have a reward and recognition program specifically for the values of the organization.
I love that.
Yeah, whether you were performing to your utmost level or not, but did you demonstrate the values into action? So I think that was a great motivator for people to demonstrate the values.
Yes.
So there's one thing, Ginny, I really want to ask you was, with your personal experience, and I'm sure you have, with a long trajectory, you would have so many. Do you remember stepping out of your own comfort zone to lead to that significant growth? Would there be an experience you'd like to share with us?
One of the ones was while I was at Google. It was kind of interesting because I was hired, as I mentioned, to help build out diversity, executive recruiting at the diversity recruiting within executive recruiting.
Right.
And it was less about the just finding a bunch of people from underrepresented backgrounds. It was more about looking structurally as what were the impediments. What were the processes that were actually getting in the way of, because I can always find people. That was not the issue. I found some amazing people, but getting leaders to consider them became the issue. And this happened at Spencer Stewart years earlier was the same thing when I was building that practice. So that's what I knew how to do. But 2 months in, the head of HR came to me and she said, "You are hereby voluntold." I'm like, okay, that's a new word for me, but I get it. That you're going to create an internal mobility program. I said, okay, tell me more. And she said, apparently Sundar Pichai, the CEO at Google, had a lot of former colleagues, because he had grown up there for a large extent, and old buddies that he'd worked with who would come to him and say, "Hey, can I get 15 minutes to chat with you? I've got an offer from this other company. I don't really want to leave. Or what do you think might be next for me so I can stay and do something, keep growing?" And he's like, can we get somebody to handle that? I'm kind of trying to run this $1 trillion business. And so, somebody said, "Well, Ginny just got here. Let's have her do it." And I jumped at the opportunity because I said, I wrote a book. That's what career mapping is all about. So I hired 3 or 4 people. Yeah, I think it was 4 ultimately, from within Google. So they knew I was 2 months in. These women, they all happened to be women. They had been there for anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And so they knew the organization. That's what I needed. And together I taught them competency-based assessment. And we figured out a way for people to be referred into this program that we call career support. Director plus. These are senior people. This is like 2% of the population of Google's employees. And we basically coached these folks on how they needed to learn how to look at their own career and make some choices about where they might want to be in the organization. We would facilitate introductions to different leaders. We also knew, because we were recruiters, all the open roles that might be relevant, which ones they should go for, which ones they shouldn't. And so that's what we did. And in the 4.5 years I was there, we had 500 plus people come through the program, and we had a 70% retention rate among them. So
that's commendable.
Right. I was very proud of that, because I think, again, this is something that, whether or not you have a program, as this was, this is something that leaders can be doing as part of their talent planning. And again, that's not HR's job. This is input that the leader needs to be getting, both their own sensibilities of how someone's doing, what skills and competencies are they developing, which ones do they need to go forward for the next year or 2 or 3. So to me, that was sort of the biggest challenge and one of the most gratifying things that I was able to contribute during my tenure there, especially.
And I'm sure it must be, absolutely a proud moment, because, you create something which is not there right from the scratch. You got a plain white canvas to kind of put in what you wanted to do. So yeah, that's fantastic. And